Everyone, I'm recording this from the road, so I'm outside. I'm sorry for any bird noise or anything else you hear. Hopefully it's just birds. We don't get any mountain lions today. So this video, I didn't really have this video planned, I'll be honest. I sent out a survey asking people for topics, and the lowest voted topic, there was only like 19 responses, but still, the lowest one was accessibility. So this video is on accessibility. That doesn't mean I'm ignoring the consensus from that survey, but I had an interesting experience this week. I was talking to somebody who uses a screen reader and kind of asking them about accessibility and what it's like. And they told me, why don't you just go use the built-in screen reader on your computer, give it a shot. And I did. And I have to say, it was a very eye-opening experience. So that's what I want to talk about here. This is the first video in a series of shorter videos about accessibility, but also through the lens of actually using a screen reader. So I'm going to fire up the screen reader. I'll show you in just a moment how I do that, and use it to test out different things, different sort of rules I've been telling my students about for a long time, but I've never actually sat on the other side and tried using a screen reader. Okay, so this one is about images. Okay, so before we get to the images, I want to talk about the screen reading software I'm using. Every operating system these days comes with a built-in one, but there are many free and paid versions online from third parties you could download. So this is not necessarily the best, but the built-in one on a Mac is called VoiceOver. If you go to System Preferences, Accessibility, VoiceOver, again, I'm not really showing you how to use it, but I'm just showing you where it is. You can enable it here. I highly recommend you go through the training if you're curious. I think it can really help you understand what it's like to use a screen reader because, well, that's the point. It's a training, and if I open it, it's going to start talking.
Quick start.
There's a lot to it, and that probably speaks to how little I knew about screen readers, but they're much more powerful than what I sort of had in my head before I actually started learning how to use one. So I highly recommend you do that if you have the time. It took me almost an hour to go through all of it, and I still can't remember all the features and commands. Okay. So you can also use a shortcut. For me, it specifies it here, Command, and then not the power button, the Touch ID button 3 times. Okay, let's begin by talking about images and accessibility. So obviously, if you're unable to see the screen or have limited visibility of the screen, images are going to be problematic. And there are a couple of things that we want to take into account when building websites. So I built this little app is the total wrong term, this little web page to show you. Here's 3 images, the exact same image source, but the first one has no alt attribute. So the alt attribute looks like this. I always tell students in one video when I'm teaching HTML, the alt attribute's important, but I never took the time to actually understand what it's like when there is an alt attribute and when there's not. And I was kind of surprised, to be honest, how serious the difference is. So this first one has no alt attribute at all. The second one is identical, except it has an alt attribute that describes the image. And the third one has an alt attribute, but it's empty. And that's very different than having no alt attribute at all. So let me show you what those 3 are like, what the experience is like as someone using a screen reader. So I'm going to launch my screen reader. Okay, and I'm going to, I guess I shouldn't call it mouse over. I'm going to use the screen reader cursor and go over this image that has no alt attribute, and it's going to be a disaster.
/photo-1505682614136-08112F9F7B question IXLIP equals RB1.2.
It reads every single character of that URL. It's insane. So that's a terrible experience. Number 1, it doesn't tell us anything about the image. And if, let's say this is a news article, there's some important information in this image we might want to tell all users, not just ones who can see it. But the other thing is that it's actively a bad experience because it's reading every character of that URL out loud. So now let's go to the second image that does have the alt attribute specified.
Heading level 3. Animal rights activist speaks into megaphone at London Fashion Week protest image.
So you can see that it reads out that description, animal rights activist, blah, blah, blah. It tells a little bit about what's happening there. I'm not saying it's the best description of the image ever, but at least you can see the difference. But sometimes you don't actually want a description on every single image. Maybe it's not important to the web page. Maybe it's purely decorative. So this isn't a great example because there is some stuff happening in here. But this is a better example. A gradient, a picture of clouds. It's decorative. This isn't a news article about pink clouds. So you could leave the alt attribute empty, which screen readers handle differently than there being no alt attribute at all. So let me show you that difference. If I go to the right image here that has an empty alt,
Heading.
it doesn't read anything to me. So the image is still there in the screen reader's mind, if you will. I still am over that image. It's taking up sort of space in the screen reader, but it doesn't read anything out to me.
Heading. Animal. Heading. Slash.
Compare that to this.
Photo-150568.
I cut it off again because it takes forever. This time, this image is being read one character at a time from the source attribute. So just to reiterate that, no alt is bad. You should pretty much never have an image without an alt attribute because it's a horrible experience for people using a screen reader. The other reason to use an alt attribute is that if for some reason the page doesn't load, or the image doesn't load on a phone or whatever device, that alt text is still specified. So it's not just for screen readers. And also it can help with SEO, allegedly, although I'm not an SEO person. And then leaving the alt attribute empty is assigned to screen readers that says, this is an image and it's not that important. There's no real content to read out loud, so don't read the entire image source. Now, there's one other topic here I want to address, which is something called the role attribute. So these two cards here, I'm using Bootstrap, they have this decorative background, as I discussed. It's not important to the content of the page. It's just a nice little visual treat, if you will. This one has an empty alt attribute on this image, which is the same as what we did here, but this one doesn't. What I did here is I used the role attribute, which if you're not familiar with role, where is it on here? Come on, here we go. You can set it to different values. I'm going to show another one in a later video. You can set something to be an alert. But role equals presentation tells screen reader that this is purely decorative content. You can skip it entirely. And it behaves a little bit different than just leaving the alt as an empty string. So I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so fired up the screen reader again, and I'm currently over the image here that has an empty alt. So let me show you that. Again, it still takes up space. You can see that black outline there, but that's not really the point, right? A lot of people who have screen readers won't be seeing that black outline, but it's taking up, I don't know what to call that. Space seems wrong, but the screen reader is registering it. And I can
Heading
go through the
level 2.
text.
This is last update. Heading level 2.
Compare that to what just happened here. When I'm on the role equal to presentation image, I can't focus on it with the screen reader. It just skips it entirely. Watch one more time. I'm going to go back to what came before.
Last visit. Heading level 2. Empty.
So I can focus on this image.
Last up. Heading level 2. Role
But
attribute.
it just skips this image entirely. It's like it doesn't exist to the screen reader. And that's great for content like this. Now, we don't want to do that for images that are important, that have meaning, that we want to show the user or we want to tell a user about. We want to explain what's happening. But in this case, we don't. Role set to attribute just makes the screen reader skip it completely. And that's pretty much it. So when it comes to making images accessible, basically never leave off the alt attribute unless you're going to set the role property to be presentation, in which case screen readers will ignore the image entirely. But along with that, it's a good idea to always have an alt attribute if there's important content there, if you need to explain what is in the image. And if it's decorative, another option is to leave the alt attribute empty, but that does allow a screen reader to focus on that image. So I like role set to presentation, but only when the content is 100% meaningless and purely decorative. Okay,